Great. So hello, everyone. My name is Abby Currier, and I'm the Community Engagement and Events Coordinator here at the History Center of Olmsted County. I'm so excited to see everyone on here tonight, and I look forward to learning more this evening about Lost Rochester. Here at the History Center of Olmsted County, we invite people to gather and explore and examine our past as we educate ourselves about the stories of Olmsted County and southeastern Minnesota. We're so excited that you have decided to join us tonight as we take a look at one of these stories. Tonight, we're going to be having a presentation from Amy Hahn on the history of Lost Rochester. After her presentation, we'll have about 15 minutes for questions from the audience. During the presentation, feel free to put any questions that you may have in the chat, and we will try to answer as many of them as we can. And you can find the chat at the bottom of your screen. It's a little message icon. But before we can get started, I just want to go over a couple of logistical things. For tonight, we are going to ask everyone to please remain muted so that we can listen to our speaker. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we will do our best to answer as many of them as we can. Make sure you keep an eye on the chat throughout the night, as sometimes some fun discussions happen in there. Anything that happens in the chat, we'll be sure to send to you tomorrow, along with a quick survey about tonight's program. It should take less than 2 minutes to fill out, and we really appreciate your feedback. We also recommend watching this in presenter view, but if you want to see everyone participating, you can do that by clicking on presentation view or view in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If you're joining us from an iPad, you may have to swipe your screen a couple of times to change the view. We are recording tonight's program, so please keep that in mind. We're so excited about tonight's talk, and we hope that you will continue to join us for some of our future events, where we will talk about everything from prison hospitals to winter gardening to Civil War photography and everything in between. These talks are one of the many great benefits to having a membership to the History Center of Olmsted County. We certainly hope that you will continue to join us for these talks, and we also hope that you will consider getting a membership to experience even more benefits. Tonight, we are joined by Amy Hahn, who is a native of Southeast Minnesota. She grew up in Harmony, a small rural town an hour south of Rochester. She holds a bachelor's degree in mass communication from Winona State University, a master's degree in mass communication from Arizona State University's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication, and a historic preservation certificate from Bucks County College, where she was awarded the department's 2016 Historic Preservation Award. She has written several historic online articles for Minnesota Historical Society's MNOpedia and Minnesota History, MHS's quarterly magazine. In addition, she has worked as a historic researcher for the History Center of Olmsted County and volunteered in its archives department. She has also worked as a magazine editor, a television news producer, a college instructor, and as a health education editor for Mayo Clinic, where she won several National Health Information Awards. Amy?
Okay, hi. All right. So while she gave the spiel on my background a little bit, so I've done a lot of journalism and media, and so I got into history. I've always liked history, so I started to volunteer at the History Center of Homestead County in their archives and library, and was very interested in that particular area with documentation and photography, historic photography, old newspapers, things like that. And that's kind of how Lost Rochester happened. What the publisher contacted the archivist, Krista, at the History Center of Homestead County and said, hey, do you know any writers that would be interested in writing a book about Rochester history? And she then got me in touch with the acquisitions editor there at the publisher. So that's kind of how this happened, Lost Rochester. And they had a new series in their, their various series for their books, and this was one of their newer series called Lost. So a lot of people ask me about how I came up with the title, and I didn't really do the title. I didn't create it. They have that in their series. So there's Lost Birmingham, Alabama, there's Lost Washington, DC, there's Lost, all these different cities. So that's why the title is Lost Rochester, Minnesota. So let's see here. The publisher is Arcadia Publishing and the History Press, which is out in South Carolina. And they really were focused on local publishing, local history. So that's kind of their forte. And the History Press is the one, they're together, but the History Press is the publisher of the Lost series. So, and I get a lot of questions about like how I came up with the cover on the book, and what I always like to tell the story. People are always interested in publishing and how it all happens. And one of the things you do is usually don't have much say in your cover. And what happened is they asked for about 3 or 4 photos for you to send in for the cover. And then they kind of select from there. You kind of tell them why they're important, why they should be selected, but they select it. So when they sent me the cover, I opened it up and it wasn't one of the photos that I had sent in. It was a photo I had sent in for the narrative to go with the story, but was not one of my cover choices. But they love street scenes. So you'll see this is a street scene, and it's the Empress Theater there, which of course is in the book about in the entertainment section. And there's plenty of theaters that Rochester had, and this was one of them. And so they love street scenes. So that's what they wanted, was to have that on the cover. So people are always kind of interested in that and how that came to be. So one of the things about Rochester, you know, we identify it so much as the med city, of course, because of Mayo Clinic. And Mayo Clinic has really become, you know, part of its identity, of course, and it's helped build it, obviously. But the reason why people came here initially was agriculture. It was farmland. It was, they wanted to have, you know, their own land to farm. Wheat became a big product here. And so really what happened is, out of this agricultural landscape, this little cosmopolitan city grew. And so that was what was really interesting about Rochester's history too. We kind of forget about that. I mean, we know that farming surrounds Rochester. It's all over this area, but we kind of forget about it when it's dwarfed by, of course, the Mayo Clinic and that history, and it's become so famous. So it's fun to dive into that, the roots really of the Rochester history. Now, one of the things that I like to do is kind of show people a little bit of that you can find evidence of what's been lost. So Lost Rochester, the series, is all about kind of the lost buildings and the businesses and the sites, historic sites that are in, you know, Rochester, and in that series in the towns, you know, that they highlight around the country. And so around Rochester, you can find evidence of what's been lost. Now, one of the things that helped Rochester grow was the Dubuque St. Paul Trail. And I love stagecoach trails and mail routes and all those old, like, Western historic things like that, including, of course, the railroads. Before the railroads, there was usually the stage route. And Rochester was no exception to that. Rochester had the Dubuque St. Paul Trail. And in Rochester, that was on 3rd Avenue Southeast, and that was also called the Dubuque Street. And so if people travel on that 3rd Avenue Southeast, they're actually traveling on the Dubuque Trail. So I always like to kind of point out that there's all this historic stuff that you don't see or know about when you're in Rochester sometimes, but it is there. The Dubuque St. Paul Trail was 272 miles from Dubuque, Iowa to St. Paul, Minnesota. It was established in 1854, and it was established as a mail route originally to deliver the mail. And then it became a stage route and immigration as well. Now, there's a main highway in here called US 52, and it followed a lot of that route up to St. Paul. It deviated a little bit in some of the smaller little communities, but it kind of follows that route. So it was north and south. A lot of the stagecoach lines right at that time were east and west here. And so north and south it became the major thoroughfare basically in Minnesota there from north to south. And when it traveled up from Dubuque, and when it came over the border, it stopped the first stop in Minnesota was a tiny little town called Eliota, which was right on the border. And Eliota was in Filmer County, Minnesota. And Eliota is now a ghost town, and it doesn't exist, which of course happened to a lot of the small towns that were along stage routes, especially if the railroad made the decision not to come through there. And that happened a lot, like at Eliota, that happened. If anybody's ever been to Filmer County down in that area, it's right along the Iowa border. And there's a town called Canton, Minnesota. And Canton didn't exist at the time of the Dubuque St. Paul Trail. What happened was Eliota was a few miles south of that. And when the Dubuque Trail came through, Eliota was a bustling little town, and it had a hotel, it had a post office, it had all these things. But when the railroad came through a few years later, the railroad decided to go north, and so Eliota died. And that happened a lot along those stagecoach routes. Rochester, though, grew a lot. And of course, when the trains came, then the Dubuque St. Paul Trail died itself. But it was a very important trail route for Rochester, and it opened it up. Before that time, a lot of the immigrants who came through, they came through Winona, so they came by boat a lot of times along the Mississippi to Winona, and then they would travel up to Rochester. And that wasn't the best landscape for traveling. If anybody's ever traveled that route, it's the topography is kind of rough. There's a lot of bluffs and limestone bluffs and stuff like that. So it wasn't the best route. And so people were actually kind of thrilled too when this opened up so they could travel along this route from Dubuque. And then from Rochester, it went up and it hit Orinoco and Zumbrota, Cannon Falls, and Hastings before arriving in St. Paul. Now, there is a monument to it, a little stone there along that 3rd Avenue Southeast about the Dubuque Trail. And it has that tiny little map. It'll show the map with the little towns that are along there. It doesn't show all the towns that were on the Dubuque Trail, but it does show several of them. And it was founded in about 1854, and it really was strong for about a decade. Before the railroads did come into Rochester. But it was still an important route. In 1857, it was the 8-foot wide Dubuque Trail was its main stage route. And in March, a reporter from a St. Paul newspaper said that the Great Dubuque and St. Paul Road passes through Rochester, where it's intersected by the principal thoroughfare from Winona westward. So Rochester was kind of an intersection of all these different stagecoach lines. And in summer, it was a sort of grand encampment of the meaning of streams of immigration upon both these roads. One of the stops in Rochester, this was the stagecoach stop. It was the Bradley House. And so it started as a cabin, a rustic cabin, and it expanded into this very nice overnight stay and accommodation, and eventually a hotel. And that was not far from the Dubuque Trail. So it kind of sat down there along the 4th and 3rd and the southeast streets there. So another ruin around Rochester is a mills. Now, because we had agriculture, mills were a big deal. So the Thompson Mill Race Park ruins, which are in Rochester here, they actually, if you walk down along those in the park there along the river, you can see the ruins of this particular mill. It was called the Cascade Mill initially, and it was built but it ended up, the famous cyclone of 1883 did destroy it, and it had to be rebuilt. Eventually, it was called the Tondro Mill. It was because the new owner, his last name was Tondro. So he renamed it. So, and when they rebuilt it, they actually built more buildings as well around it. And they kind of learned too to build an extra building on this, away from the main mill building, where they could put their steam engines, because steam engines, the boilers could start fires. And that happened a lot in mills. So, but the Tondro Mill eventually kind of, stopped being used, and then eventually they vacated it and it fell to fire. But they did build a 1-story building about 50 feet wide at the mill, and it was built to house the steam engine, and it had 6-foot high openings of doors because they knew how important it was to keep those boilers away. A Record and Union article from April 1875 stated that no mill in the city puts out a better grade of flour than this Cascade Mill, which became the Tondro Mill. Another kind of lost building here or place was the Rochester State Hospital. And Rochester State Hospital was the second state hospital in Minnesota. The first one was in St. Peter. And this is a silo, and it's a community college campus here in Rochester. And if you can drive along there, they have baseball diamonds and things like that. But it used to be the farming area of the state hospital. The state hospital here was its own community. It had a quarry. It had, a big farm, hundreds of acres of farmland, and it had its own beautiful gardens. It was quite its own community. It had its own band, it had its own nursing school, but this silo is really what's kind of left of it. But it's kind of a neat structure that's here in Rochester. This is a picture of the farm, the state hospital farmland, and you can see, you know, how vast it was and how many buildings were there. And the patients that were at the Rochester State Hospital did work at the farm. They worked at the quarry as well. They worked in the kitchens. They had jobs too. So, and at first these state hospitals, they were created for people who had alcoholic problems, and then eventually it became from, you know, it was mental health, and they were patients were staying for their mental health at the state hospitals. And down below is, you can see the tower there of the main building, the administrative building of the state hospital. And that was the Kirkbride plan, which was an architectural style for a lot of hospitals like this around the country. They were built in a very unique style. They were about 3 to 5 stories in height, and they always kind of sat amidst this beautiful manicured property. And Rochester State Hospital had beautiful gardens, and there's pictures of those gardens, and it was just immaculately kept. Now, this is the courthouse. It was the Washington County Courthouse in Stillwater, Minnesota, and it's right up the road from Rochester. And I like to point this out to people because we lost our original courthouse in Rochester. It was torn down, but this is basically the same courthouse. It's built by the same architect. It's a little bigger, but it looks pretty much the same. So if you want a little glimpse at what Rochester's original courthouse looked like, you can just travel up the road to Stillwater, Minnesota, and you can get a glance at this one. It's beautiful. And they were designed by the exact same architect who was Minnesota born. So, and they were red, kind of had a red tint to them, red brick tint. Now, eventually, here's the Rochester Courthouse. So I can show you, if I can go back, if you look at this one, and then you look at this one, you can see that they're very similar in the design. They look a lot alike. But what happened with Rochester's is they eventually painted it a kind of a bright white color, which didn't always go over well with people. And so they did end up tearing it down eventually. It also was a victim of the 1883 cyclone that ripped through Rochester, which we talk about a lot because it's a major milestone in Rochester's history. And it wasn't spared. I mean, it did survive it, but that dome on top did crash through the top of the building because of the extreme winds. And they didn't replace it until 1892. But the goddess on top was never replaced. She actually is the goddess Themis, and she deals with justice, and she has a sword in one hand, and she has weight scales in the other that, of course, are to balance fairness and justice. And the sword is a reminder that if you don't do fairness and justice and follow the law, that then you will pay the price. So, but she has come back to surface, and they have put her back in the courthouse. So she kind of moved around a bit and disappeared some, but they did kind of, they kind of worked on her and cleaned her up, and she's kind of come back. Another thing I like to talk about, because I always like this, is in the Siebens building of the Mayo Clinic in the subway. Some people will just walk right past it. There's a really beautiful water fountain, a bubbler, and that is actually from the original 1914 Mayo building. And the 1914 building was it was the first building to carry the Mayo Clinic name. It was the first building that they ever built for Mayo Clinic. And it's got names like the Red Brick Building, the original Mayo Building. But this particular thing, they pulled this from before they tore it down to build the Siebens building. They took this out to preserve it. So it is in the Siebens subway of the Siebens building. And it was a fixture in the lobby. Here's the 1914 building. And the pottery on it, the tile on it, the green tile that you saw is from the Rookwood Pottery Company of Cincinnati, Ohio. And that was just, they designed and manufactured the lobby's decorative tile, which of course matched the one on the water fountain. And they had a huge central fountain in there also with that tile, and then the smaller drinking fountain. And there was a big staircase when you walked in, an imperial stairway, and the first flight had a landing, and then you could look over and see the expansive lobby, and then you could go right or left and ascend to the second floor. So they did preserve a little piece of that lobby. One of the things that Rochester did not have in its early days was a lake. And we have Silver Lake now, but that wasn't until the 30s. But before that time, people retreated to Orinoco, which is a little north of Rochester. And Orinoco had Lake Shady. And this is a current picture. Well, it was taken a few years ago when the book was released, but this was where Lake Shady was once. So all that grassland that you see was once a lake. And Lake Shady was where very prominent individuals from Rochester had summer cottages, and it had all kinds of activities during the summer. And of course, once again, a mill made the lake. They dammed it and for power and from the Zumbro River, and they made Lake Shady. So they had their summer, like the Mayos had summer cottages up there. They were up there quite often, but it's disappeared now. There is no Lake Shady anymore. But it had glory years. And there was a dance pavilion, and there was, all kinds of rental cottages and boats you could rent. And there was a Boy Scout camp, and there was a, hotel, and there was a scenic drive. And, so it was very popular for a very long time as a summer getaway. And to the south, so Orinoco sits to the north of Rochester a few miles, and to the south a few miles is Stewartville. And in Stewartville, there was Florence Lake, and now it's a park, and it's a really beautiful park. It's got beautiful walkways, and it's got a fountain, and it's right by the Root River. So now Rochester, the Zumbro River runs through Rochester, and just south of Rochester, you have the Root River. And Florence Lake was made once again from a mill they dammed the river for power, and they created this Lake Florence. So Florence also became a place that people from Rochester and Southeast Minnesota went and had a great time with boating and other activities. So they had two lakes on the north end of Rochester and the south end of Rochester that they spent a lot of their summer holidays in. And they talked about a lot of activities there, like winter activities too, like ice skaters. There's large bonfires on Lake Florence, even in the 60s and 70s, which isn't that long ago. And the lake boasted a warming house and ice rinks. And then there was always fishermen catching all kinds of different fish. So, but now there's no lake there either. It's just the Root River that goes along there. I get asked a lot what my favorite buildings were that I discovered, or, sites or stories, businesses. And so I always like to share a few. So one of my favorite buildings that was lost was the Knowlton House. And that was E.A. Knowlton and Ella Blake's home. And it was just a beautiful Victorian mansion. And I just love the witch's hat turret. I think that's so cool. And then there's the widow's walk above with the beautiful iron detailing. And Knowlton was very well known here. He was a prestigious business owner. He owned the Knowlton store, and it was here for decades. And it eventually was replaced by Dayton's here in town, downtown Rochester. He married Ella Rebecca Blake, who was the sister of his partner, J.D. Blake. And Elliot and Ella lived in that home from 1889 to 1906. And then it was actually converted to a hotel. And it was the first Kaler Hotel in Rochester. So in 1906, it stopped being a private residence, and it became a hotel. And eventually the home became the entrance to the Damon Hotel here. So they added on to it, lots of wings, and then the main house became the entrance to the Damon Hotel. And they called it the Damon Hotel after the second Kaler was built. So there would be no confusion. Another thing that I found very interesting for businesses was the Rochester Woolen Mills, which was here from 1897 to 1903, which really isn't long at all, but I thought it was very fascinating. They made, once again, this kind of has an agricultural connection because of, having a wool, and they made woolen blankets, and they had Queen City, which was a solid, solid print, and they had the Zumbro, which was the striped print. And then they were very well known for their woolen trousers for men, and they had striped and plaid, and that was very popular. So I thought that was kind of interesting to stumble upon. I'd never even heard of them before. And, the blankets sounded that they were like well known, not just in Rochester, like trousers and the blankets, but like regionally and even nationally, it had become well known for its production of the wool blankets and the trousers. And Rochester was very proud of this. I know it was here a short time, but they were very proud of it. And I love this clip. Old newspapers, if you ever read through them, are very descriptive. And I love their descriptions of things. They'll go on forever to describe something, but I think that's just beautiful. And they talk about the whistle and how important that whistle is. And it talks about there was a perceptible ring of pride in the screech of the shrill of the labor, an arbitrary thrill which seemed to imply, I am the mouth of Rochester's principal industry. I speak every noon. So they fired it at noon. They fired it when they started. They fired off the whistle at the end of the day. And it talks about that it's about enterprise of business of progress, the inspiration, for the Queen City. And I love the end where it says, I've awakened her businessmen from the dull stupor that has settled over them, and the bright sun of enterprise shines abroad in the land, and prosperity is here. So Rochester was very proud of their mill, their woolen mills, even though it was here for just a short time. And one of my favorite lost stories that I discovered as I was researching was, I think people have heard about the Horse Thief Caves in town. There's kind of a legend about the caves. Now, our area here, we are built on a topography, like the towns are built on a topography known as karst topography. And underneath us are tons of caves and streams, underground streams. And of course, we have a lot of above ground streams. And there's all these legends about the caves. And one of them has always been that Jesse James in the Younger Game, they hung out there when they, robbed the bank in Northfield. And it's a question of, is it true? Is it not true? There's never been any evidence of that. In fact, when I was starting to research this, it seemed like they didn't come south. They kind of tried to head west and get out like towards Dakota instead of coming this way. But even in my home area of, Filmer County, there was a legend that they hung out in the sinkholes down there. And the sinkholes are part of that karst topography down there, and that they were, hiding out there. So was it true? I don't think that James Younger Game hung out there, but it's possible there was horse thieves. Some of these caves were very large, and there's horses and other animals would actually fall through, and there was articles about that in the old newspapers. And Corey Hill, if you go to Corey Hill, which was once part of the state hospital, there's a cave tour that you can take, and the state hospital used to use caves to keep like their food cold. And so there's actually a lot of that, underneath the ground. And like I said, there was incidents of animals falling into caves, and there was even a description of one farmer who kept it, he put livestock in there and crops, and even dug out more, extended the caves. And if you go south of here into Filmer County, there's Niagara Cave and there's Mystery Cave, and you can go into those caves and you can experience, that. It's very interesting to hear about how those caves were made. So we do have caves here, and animals fell in them, and they were big enough for people to hide out in. But there's no concrete evidence that they were ever housed horse thieves, but there was horse thievery around here, and it was a problem. Of course, back in the 1800s, horses were very important. They weren't just for recreational purposes. They were used to farm. They were used to pull your carriage. storage. They were important to a family to have. And there were anti-horse thief societies around here, and that they would then, when a horse was stolen, they would have a posse and they would try to go find, the people who took the horse. I did stumble upon a female horse thief that was put in jail here. Her name was Mary Hyatt. I'm not sure if that was her real name or not, but supposedly she was part of the circus that was in town, and the circus left and they left her, and she was stuck here. And then she decided to steal a pony and try to go run off to La Crosse, which is the next stop, the circus's next stop. And she got caught. So, and whether she hung out in a cave to hide away from authorities, I don't really know. The articles never said that, but horse thievery did happen. Now, part of this too is I'm working on a new book, but Hidden History of Rochester, Minnesota. So I'm kind of immersed in that too. And Hidden History is a little different from the Lost. The Lost is more about the lost businesses and the lost buildings and the lost sites, historic sites. This one is another series, part of the same publisher, and it focuses a lot on people. So there's definitely some business stuff in there. Of course, Lost Rochester talks about, the people behind the businesses and behind the buildings, the architects and those types of people. But Hidden History kind of dives more into more of the people. And I'm working on it right now, but I'm hoping I think it'll be the end of November. People have been asking me, and but I'm never really quite sure yet. It kind of is following along the same timeline as Lost. So I'm hoping that it would maybe be November of 2022, but we'll see. So I wanted to give you a little look at some of that, about some of the hidden stories that I found. Now, it doesn't mean they're completely hidden. It's just that these particular people or these topics haven't gotten much of a spotlight compared to some other, topics here in Rochester. You may have heard of them once in a while, you may not have, but they just don't have the spotlight. So like I said, what's hidden is Lost Rochester focused on the physical structures, sites, and historic businesses that are no longer here. Hidden History puts a spotlight on the seldom known historic people and sometimes even events that happened here. So I was looking at Civil War, heroes here in Rochester, and one of them is Colonel James George. Now he's really well connected with Dodge County, which borders Olmsted County, and Wasioja, which is a tiny little town about 20 miles west of Rochester. Wasioja, there's several structures that are on the National Registry of Historic Places, and this is one of them. You'll see in the picture there that I have of it was the recruiting station for James George. He was a lawyer and he practiced in Wasioja first. He ended up in Rochester and eventually he lived here and he practiced law here, and then he did die here. But he started out in Wasioja and he practiced law there in that little tiny building. And it's one of the only, or one of the very few recruiting stations that's left in Minnesota. And it's just outside of Rochester. And he's recruited 80 men and formed a C company of the Second Minnesota. So he basically the whole C company, he kind of helped recruit. And he was able to recruit that many men because actually Wasioja had a seminary. So Wasioja now, if you were to go through it, it's just a tiny little place, but it was a booming place during the right before the Civil War. And during the Civil War, it was a booming little town. And so they joined him. And then I discovered that, like at the History Center of Olmsted County, they had letters of his and his wife. And his wife actually traveled with him. And that happened a lot during the Civil War. I don't know if it gets really covered a lot, but wives did sometimes follow their husbands to these camps. And so she actually writes letters too of her experiences. So I thought that was pretty interesting to stumble upon her as well, and her experiences with her husband. Another kind of hidden hidden story was the suffrage activists in Rochester. Now, last year, I had the privilege of helping the History Center of Olmsted County with their suffrage exhibit, and I helped to research that. And the goal is to really discover the women and men in the area in the early parts usually of the suffrage kind of movement, to see what we could find about who was here and who helped be activists. And there were some famous names, and Susan B. Anthony did visit Rochester, and Sarah Berger Stearns was here. She lived here for a few years. She's a very well-known suffrage activist. She eventually moved to Duluth. But there was also local women who got very active. Now, one of them was Sarah W. Clark. And Sarah Clark, she ended up being a widower, but she ended up being a business owner. She was an entrepreneur. She owned land. And she probably knew Sarah Berger Stearns because they started one of the first suffrage organizations in Minnesota together here in Rochester. And so I stumbled upon her and I thought that was interesting. What was also interesting is she made corsets. And so she was well known and respected for her corset making, and she had her own store where she made corsets and sold them. And another thing that during my research, we wanted to look at themes for the suffrage activists, like what connected them. And one of the things I stumbled upon was the Order of the Eastern Star. And I'd never heard of that before, actually. And it isn't a part of the Masonic fraternity or the Freemasons. And it was started for men and women. But of course, women for a long time were not allowed to be part of the Freemasons. And so this was started, and many, not just local suffrage activists, but many suffrage activists across the whole country, if you research their backgrounds, were members of the Order of the Eastern Star. And Rochester had its very own chapter too. So that was interesting to stumble upon as well. Also, we had a family in town, that's the Bach family, and they had a music store for a long time. They didn't just have a music store in Rochester, they almost had a chain of them here in the area, like Owatonna had one in various towns. And they are actually connected to the famous J.S. Bach, but they're also connected to the Empress of Ireland, which was a very infamous ship. Now we all know about the Titanic and we know about the Lusitania, but the Empress of Ireland also was a ship that sank in the St. Lawrence River in 1914. And on that was a Rochester citizen. And so it's interesting to stumble upon him. Now I'd heard of the Bach family, the music stores, of course, but then when I discovered him, that was interesting. He's kind of the patriarch of the family. He immigrated here from Germany, and it was his sons who really became the store owners, and they were the musicians. But he was on his way to Germany with his daughter, and he hadn't been back since he was a child, and he wanted to go see family. And he also was supposedly carrying very important papers that connected him to the famous composer. Now he is related to the famous composer. They share a similar family line. So it was interesting to stumble upon too. And so I'm excited to share that story with you in more depth in the Hidden History. Also, I don't know how many people have heard about Frank Billings Kellogg, but he was from Rochester, and he was a prominent lawyer. He ended up going up to the cities and practicing after being here for a long time. He married Clara Cook, who was a socialite here and a teacher, and he served as a state and U.S. senator, and he won a Nobel Peace Prize as well. And he always credited his wife on several occasions for his success. He was very complimentary to her. And when I was researching them, I mean, he's fascinating in himself, of course, and he's pretty well known, but his wife was very interesting too. And they were over in Great Britain. He was a US ambassador there, and she actually became very good friends with Queen Mary. So I found that was kind of fun to stumble upon. So that's another one that I'm planning to highlight in the Hidden History. Now, across the US in the 1920s, there was really interest in barnstorming in planes, aerial stunts. And Rochester had its own teen sensation. Now, the top picture there is Lillian Boyer, and she was famous in the country for her wing walking on the plains. Here she is flying through the air. But Rochester had its very own daredevil, and her name was Lottie. And Lottie was just 16 years old. She was dubbed Daring Lottie, and she became started being a wing walker at just 16. And so she performed at various things around here, like, fairs and other events around Southeast Minnesota. So, but she was just a teenager when she started. Now, I always get questions too about, my research, and I will say I spent a lot of time at the History Center of Homestead County in their archives and library. I think I mentioned that I volunteered there for a while. And it really is this treasure trove of documents and just, photos. It's amazing what they have there. So I always encourage people, if they're doing personal research or professional research, that it's a great place to go. And what I use for my research now, for Lost Rochester, I had 9 months to do it. So I had 9 months from the time I signed a contract to the time it was public, time I had to submit all my photos and my content. And so I was there a lot, and now this one is similar. It's about a year. The hidden history will be about a year. It's kind of the timeline. So in the History Center of Olmsted County, there's biographical vertical files that I used, and that would be on people as well as on businesses and other subject material. I used a lot of the county history books. I used yearbooks. There's historic newspapers like on the microfilm. I was immersed in that a lot. I have a lot of interest in as a journalist, I guess, from my background, in old newspaper articles, because they're absolutely fascinating. And their descriptions, one of the things I loved using in my Lost was their descriptions of like the new theaters that were built. Their descriptions were very, very captivating and beautiful. The volunteers and staff at the History Center of Olmsted County really helped me a lot. They're a wealth of knowledge. And so sometimes I'd mention a topic, but I maybe didn't know there was, information there, but they were able to help me and find it. So that was great. Or maybe they had ideas for some new topics. And that's what happens when you're researching history. Sometimes you kind of go down a rabbit hole, or, you stumble upon new things that you never knew existed. And then that opens up a whole new thing for what you want to write about. There's a lot of photo archives too. Now there's 75 pictures in Lost Rochester. And there's all of them. The one I took one of the map there of the Dubuque Trail from the beginning that's on that stone, but the historic pictures in Lost are from the History Center of Olmsted County. So they have a really wealth of information and things there to use. And I'm planning to use a lot too for the Hidden History book. There's obituary scrapbooks, there's cemetery records, and then there's a visitor guide called Know Rochester that I stumbled upon when I was volunteering there. And so the Know Rochester is like a visitor's guide, and it talked about things like, what movies were in town, what restaurants to go to, but it also would have little historic articles about things. So that was really interesting to find. And so when I started doing my research, I knew that, Know Rochester did a story on this. And so then I would pull it out and I would look at it and use it as a reference. Let's see. Oh, okay. All right. So I guess now I just want to know if there's any questions or any discussion. So let's see.
Yeah, and so, Amy, if you want to end I'm just going to end your sharing here.
Sure.
Okay, great. So we did have a couple of questions come in through the chat throughout the evening. But again, if anyone on the call has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or if Amy's okay with it, we can also just open it up. If people want to raise their hands, we can do that as well. So the first question is, was there significant wool production in the area to support the woolen mills?
Well, yeah, that's a good question because there's not a lot of sheep around. Doesn't seem to be the big agricultural pull here. And for a time there was, that's why there was a wool mill, I think originally in Chatfield. I think it was Chatfield. And the person who started the mill here, the woolen mill here, that's where they came from originally. And I want to say, and I'm not sure, that maybe there was a fire at the Chatfield one, which prompted him to come up here and make a new mill. So yeah, I don't think there probably was as much of that here, but for a while they were producing it there. But like I said, that wool mill didn't last very long. It was only a few years, and then it supposedly it was bad management too that went into that business kind of folding up. But I don't, the big agriculture here was wheat. Wheat was the king. And when you read about all the mills here, really this whole area of Southeast Minnesota, Olmsted County, Fillmore County, Houston County, Wabasha County, Goodhue County, all these counties around here, they were really the breadbasket of, the area, Minnesota, even, the country in a way. I mean, it was king. They called it king because it was a huge cash crop, and Rochester made money off that. And with all their mills, I mean, there's no reason to have all those mills if you didn't have all that wheat. And corn wasn't as big at the time. Corn came eventually, but the wheat was the big thing during the beginnings of Rochester. So.
How does the Damon Hotel relate to the current Damon building on the Mayo campus? Do you know any stories about that name?
Yeah, well, it's Hattie Damon, and she was married to one of the Mayos, and so it's named after her. But I think the Damon building is a parking ramp now. Is that, I thought it was? Is it a parking ramp?
Yeah, I think there's a Damon parking ramp.
I think it's a parking ramp. I think. Huh?
It used to be a parking ramp back in the 60s, and now the Gonda building is sitting where it was.
Yeah, and so the Damon Hotel, it was across from there, so across from where the Gonda is. So that's where that sat. That's where the Knowlton House sat, and which became the Damon Hotel. And then, so I think I'm trying to think, it's hard sometimes everything's changed down there, and you almost need to walk around with like maps upon maps to look at how things changed and where all the buildings were located. But it was across from the Gonda there was where the Damon Hotel was there that would be the east side or west side of the Gonda building on that side. So, but the Damon is a family name. It's a Mayo. It's related to Mayo. So.
Gotcha. How did Rochester get its original name, Queen City? I've never heard its history.
Lots of people talk about Queen City, but Rochester wasn't the only one to have that. It's kind of a little nickname that a lot of cities gave to themselves. You'll find it in other cities too. And I don't think there's a specific, as far as I know, a specific origin of where that nickname came from. And like I said, you'll find that there's a lot of cities that call themselves Queen City. And I see it's kind of come back. There's Queen City Coffee here in town now. And but if anybody else knows anything different, please pipe in. But I know, as far as I know, there's not a specific example or where it came from. There's kind of all these reasonings, but I do know that a lot of cities would call themselves that Queen City or King City or anything like that. So Rochester kind of called themselves that for a time. It was one of their nicknames. But if anybody has, an origin story on it, please share, because
so Dan Gordon said, I'm surprised that you haven't mentioned George Head, also known as the father of Rochester. Is there more about him in your book?
Yeah, well, not really not in Lost, no. And because I was writing about lost businesses and buildings and sites, and then this one, a hidden history, no, because I felt like, I guess I do feel like he's well known, and it is hard to choose. I mean, I might mention him in it, but it is really hard to choose who you cover in these books. And you don't have a lot of, you get about 40,000 word count in these books. And the topics, I start out with lots and I have to kind of shave it down. But yes, I know a lot, I know about him, and I guess I kind of had feeling that he was more well known. The spotlight had been more on him. There's been more about him than some of the other people that I was highlighting. So my plan was not to have a lot about him, but I also, another person that I am going to talk, I am going to talk about the first cemetery in Rochester as well. And then how that led to Oakwood Cemetery, and Healy being involved with that. He's kind of well known too, but the first cemetery is an interesting story, that when Rochester people came here, they didn't have a cemetery, and they just kind of put people in this one location, and they didn't really identify them. And they, it was kind of, people started to be appalled by that. And then they decided that they needed this Oakwood Cemetery, and that's kind of how Oakwood was created. So I'm going to talk about that some. So I thought that was interesting, but yeah, but you make a good point, and there's a lot of people, interesting people to cover. So I wish the book could be bigger too, and then you can add more people.
So you mentioned a couple times the Dubuque Trail plaque. Where is that located?
It's 3rd Avenue Southeast, so kind of behind Kmart, if everybody knows where the old Kmart was back there. And what's the church there? Is it Bethel Church? Yeah, so it's like almost across from there. There's an office there. I can't remember the name of the office that it sits in front, but it's right along the road. And but it's right behind like the old Kmart area there. So
do you know off the top of your head, when was the Rochester State Hospital built, and then when did it close?
Yeah, off the top of my head, let's see, where's my book? No,
I think it's on the shelf behind you.
Yeah, I do, I have it. Yeah. Yeah,
careful advertising.
No, it's here we go, hold on a minute, let me just bring it up. Sometimes dates, when I was immersed in this, I remember it, I had it right off the top of my head. And now let's see, it's in April 1876, the state commissioners selected 160 acres for the property to be built. So it started, but construction started in 1877. So that's when the construction started on it. And they think it was done maybe like in the next, by the fall, maybe in here. I'm trying to look here. Here it goes. The hospital was opened on January 1st, 1879. So that's when it opened in 1879. So, and the first one was in St. Peter. I don't know if I said that, but it was in St. Peter, was the first state hospital. So.
Okay. Can you comment at all on the distinction between the History Center of Olmsted County and the Mayo Historical Archives?
Okay.
Have you used both? What's the similarities and differences?
Yeah, well, I didn't use the Mayo Historical Archives actually, but I mean, I know where they're located, and I've been to the historical suite and everything at the Plummer Building. But the History Center of Homestead County, Abby could help me out here too, maybe on that. But the History Center of Homestead County is a separate entity from the Mayo, and I didn't use Mayo for my history. I was really at the History Center. I mean, the History Center of Homestead County does have a lot of information about the Mayos. And my book, I mean, I talk about the Mayos, but I do focus on a lot of other businesses in town and buildings as well. So I focus on a lot of different things that the Mayo historical suites would not have. They obviously would have the stuff on the Mayos, and on the 1914 building and those types of things, but not on, other things in the area. I mean, the History Center of Olmsted County focuses on Olmsted County. So that's kind of why. And in fact, my first proposal for the book was Olmsted County itself. I was kind of interested in highlighting Olmsted County. I thought, well, wouldn't that be kind of fun to highlight some of the other areas around instead of just Rochester? But they really did want Rochester. And of course, one of the reasons was the Mayo connection, too, because that would draw more people of interest to the book. So So I don't know if that helps people or not, but but I do highly recommend going to the Plummer building and going up to that to the historical suite. And I can't remember what floor it's on, but it's a beautiful. First of all, the Plummer building itself is gorgeous. It's one of my favorite buildings in town, but the historical suite's very interesting, and you can walk through there, and they have a lot of great historical artifacts there. So.
Can you talk at all about kind of the process? I know you touched on it briefly for selecting what stories make it into the book, and maybe some of your favorite stories that you wish could have gone into the book but didn't make it.
Yeah, so, it is hard to make those choices. You start out with a lot of topics, a lot of interesting topics, and then you got to figure out too how you're going to section off your book. I kind of like things like in my book, I have, I have, a chapter on transportation, early transportation. Then I have chapter 2 is rooted in agriculture. I like to kind of separate things out like that. Third chapter is growing up medical, things like that. So then I can kind of group them together. And I had other interests too, like, there's a lot of restaurants that are no longer here, a lot. And I thought that would be interesting too, is to write about some of the old restaurants that were here in town. And I wrote a little bit about the schools, but there's more information there as well. So that's hard when you have, and there's also decades, if you go through decades. First I thought maybe I should do by decades. And I thought, well, maybe that's what I should do. But I didn't do that. I decided, no, I like to do my other way better. But it was hard. It was hard to leave things out. It was, lots of people say, why wasn't this in there? Why wasn't that in there? I'm like, yeah, it would be great. Actually, you could have many, you could have Lost Rochester 1, Lost Rochester 2, Lost Rochester 3. You could have a series of them because there's so much here that we have lost. There's so much gone. And there's so much, even in Hidden, if you look at like Hidden History of Rochester, there's so much of that too. And, I kind of tried to include things that I was very interested in. I think that's it, they leave that to you, the editors, about what you are interested in including in your book, which is kind of nice because you have that freedom. And I was interested in early Rochester more so than anything. And some of the early stuff that I'd stumbled upon when I was helping in the archives. So a lot of the stuff that I had in my book, I had found when I was volunteering. And so I included, things that I was most interested in, but there is a lot more. Like I said, restaurants would be a big one. Churches would be another one. There's a lot of churches too that are no longer here either. And that would also be, there's beautiful pictures of them in the archives. And there's lots of pictures of restaurants too. So there's a lot of history there that it'd be great to also include in a book, and I do know that this particular publisher also has a series about kind of eating restaurants and things like that. And so, you could do a book just focused on the restaurants that was for Rochester, because they would have plenty of that here. There's plenty of restaurants to do. As far as, did I leave anything out that I wish I didn't have to? I don't know. I don't think of anything specific on that. But there's always interesting topics that I would like to cover. I think that, like I said, one of the things that happens to you when you're researching is you sometimes you start on a path and you go down a whole different path. We call it rabbit hole or whatever, and sometimes that ends in a good story, and sometimes it doesn't end anywhere near where you would think it would end. And another thing that happened is you have to, with your stories, have good photos, images to go with it. So they want visuals. So maybe I had a great story, and there were a few of them maybe that I had that I thought, well, this would be interesting, but I didn't have a photo to go with it. And so that when you're cutting your narrative, your text, then you can go, okay, I don't have a photo of that. I don't have an image to go with that. So I guess I can just set that aside and not have that in the book. And that happened a few times too. Or sometimes there's a great image in the archives. It's a great image. And there on the back might be just a little tiny 2-sentence thing, description of what it is or why it's, but it's not enough to write a whole story. And sometimes you can't find more information about it. amazingly, there are times where no one could. We can't find the information about this, or there's unidentified photos that you're like, what is this? Or, that happens too. So, but it did happen a few times where I had some things where I was like, that would make a good story, but I don't have the image to go with it. There is no images available. So
So we had a couple other questions come in, and I'll be able to answer at least one of them.
Okay.
So Kristen asked if we want to see if HCOC has information about a Rochester resident, what's the best way to contact us? And so I'll put that information in the email tomorrow, but we have a fantastic archivist who works at the History Center 5 days a week. Krista is there Tuesdays through Saturdays, and fields all kinds of research requests. And you can also check out the archives on our website. So our website's olmstedhistory.com, and then I believe it's the research tab, and archives will be underneath there. But I'll make sure that all of that information is included in an email you'll get tomorrow morning.
Yeah, and there's some online you can do, some online research, because you can search some things on there, and that helps Chris out too. If you've already searched for some topics or, businesses or people or whatever, and sometimes it'll tell you even what they have in the archives that's available. And also in the newspapers, there's a newspaper index, and so you can do searches for things, and it'll tell you where it's available in the newspaper, like the microfilm, like where, the date of it, the column, the page number, which paper it was in, that, all that information too. So that's very helpful to have that.
I do not have the answer to the next question, and I'm not sure if Amy does either, but I can check with our archivist tomorrow. So do you have any idea if the huge photo collection from the old Michael's restaurant will be archived somewhere?
Oh, you mean like all their celebrity photos? Is that what, because they used to take pictures of all the celebrity people that come in. Is that what I'm guessing? That's what they mean?
That seems reasonable to me.
Okay. I don't know. I haven't heard about what happened to all those pictures. I'm assuming the Pappas family has those, the Michaels owners, but I don't know what's happening to them. But they did always, that was a Michaels thing, that when famous people came into Michaels, they usually would take a picture. And when you walk down the hallway to go out of Michaels, they were along that hallway to the parking ramp. So okay. I'm curious to know too. I wonder where they went, because they had a lot of famous pictures there that I'm not sure. That's a good question.
You spoke about the Dubuque Trail also being used as a mail route.
Yeah.
Do you know where the original post office would have been?
Well, let's see. I think the original post office was in a little cabin right along the trail. So like, I don't know if the Bradley house was it at first, it started out as a cabin. So the Bradley house, that hotel that was there, the stagecoach stop, it started out as a cabin there, and then it expanded. But originally in my research, if I recall, there was the postal office would have been, I think, in the cabin that was along there, the trail. And then there's been several maiden post offices in Rochester that, over time. So, but I think it started out in a rustic little cabin right along the south, 3rd Avenue Southeast there, which was Dubuque Street, because at that time, well, that first there was no name probably, but then it became Dubuque Street after the Dubuque Trail. And eventually they changed. And the reason why it's hard sometimes to research in Rochester, and it probably is like this in a lot of cities, but before World War I, there were downtown, the streets were different. They were named different. And a lot of them had names like Oak Street, Poplar Street, things like that. And after World War I, they changed them to be like, with numbers. So it was supposedly that was just easier for mail routes and things like that. So sometimes when you're researching and you come across an address, you got to kind of go, okay, where was that? Because that street doesn't exist anymore. Well, it does, but it's been renamed. So it gets kind of confusing, and that's mainly downtown, in the downtown part of Rochester. Broadway stayed the same. Broadway is the same. It didn't change its name, but a lot of the other streets did. So it gets confusing when you research sometimes, when the old like directories and stuff have the old addresses, and then you got to go, okay, now where is that? And it was on this street. It gets kind of confusing. Like I said, you got to walk around downtown with multiple maps that you can see, set upon each other and then look at, okay, this is where these things were, or this is what the street names were. That would be kind of helpful. Someone should probably invent that. I don't know. That'd be a good.
So we are working on a walking tour app.
Yes.
I'll send some information out about that tomorrow, where not all of the stories we've covered tonight, but I believe a couple of them are covered, where you can walk around downtown and there'll be pictures and text talking about what used to be in that location.
Yeah, and that I kind of helped with some of that, and that was fun. And it is really a fun app. It's Pocket Sites is the app, and it is fun to use it. And you can use it, if you're not downtown too, you can use it like if you're sitting at home, you have that option, and then you can just walk through the various landmarks down there. And a lot of them, it's places that aren't there anymore. But I think they're planning to add more and more all the time. But right now, I don't remember. They have 18 maybe or something like that on there.
Yeah, I think the high teens.
Yeah. So yeah, that was fun to work on that. It was fun to help out with that. So I've enjoyed just doing it myself, doing the tour. So
yeah. And so we had a question about theaters. Did you say that you had a chapter on theaters in your book?
I do. I have a chapter on the entertainment, which Rochester, it kind of had its own, like Broadway Avenue had several theaters. So it kind of had its own little Broadway, I guess. So there was the
sorry, there was some follow-up questions. What were some of the earliest ones, and were there any vaudeville?
Oh yeah, vaudeville was big here. Yeah, vaudeville was big entertainment, and Rochester really was a booming little town, and entertainment was a big deal. And luckily we still have the Chateau down there, but there was the Metropolitan Theater in town, and there was the Majestic Theater in town, there was the Empress Theater in town, there was the Lawler Theater in town, and there was the Time Theater. So there was quite a few of them downtown. As far as the first one, I was trying to think which one would have been the first one. Let me see here. I can't remember, but several of them were along Broadway, like I said. So it was kind of, like I said, Rochester had its own little Broadway of entertainment. And vaudeville, if I can get to the one about the Majestic, it talks about the vaudeville that came through. Let's see here. Hold on a minute. There it is. Okay. The Majestic. Okay. The Majestic had a vaudeville act. So the Majestic was the first Majestic actually opened in 1908. It was in a couple locations, and it wasn't in the first location very long before it moved. And it opened up with this big vaudeville show. It was Huntleys. They were a wife and husband duo, and of course they had a big troupe with them, and they opened there at the Majestic Theater, and it was a big deal. And they were there for, like, I don't remember if it was 3 nights, or it was a big deal. It was like sold out shows, and they did vaudeville. But the Huntleys also did, they had their own camera, and they did their own video too. So they even had that in their shows. So they were quite popular around the area. They traveled all over. And so they came to Rochester to open up the Majestic Theater. So that was a pretty big deal. So, and that would have been before, you had the movies and then before the talkies. And so they definitely had vaudeville come through. All the theaters did, except for maybe the Time Theater, which was later, but they did do vaudeville in the beginning. And then when they had silent movies, they had orchestras that played. They had their own orchestras that would, of course, play for the sound effects of the movie before the talkies came in. So they were all built to have that, have that ability to, so.
And do you have the location for where the Majestic was?
Yeah, the Majestic here was on 110 South Broadway, and that was the first location. So that was 110 South Broadway, and then it moved just up the street. So it didn't move very far. Yeah, it wasn't very far, and then it moved up the street. I can't remember if it was only a couple doors down. I think it was that it moved. Let's see here.
We'll call it 112 Broadway.
It moved to 212 South Broadway. So it was not far. So a little bigger. It was a little bigger because the Majestic was pretty, it was like a small little theater. But I mean, moviegoers, they weren't really movies then, but going to the shows, they loved the Majestic. But then it was so popular, then they had to kind of move and make it a little bigger. So.
Are there any other questions coming in? So I think we've answered all of them in the chat. All right, I don't see anyone else coming in. So I think we'll be able to start wrapping up. So thank you so much to our audience tonight for asking so many great questions, and to our presenter for sharing her time and expertise with us. We hope that you enjoyed tonight's program and that you continue to join us in the future as we discuss everything from restrictive housing covenants to more stories of hidden Rochester and so much more. Check out our website, olmstedhistory.com, to keep up to date on all of our events and programs. If you enjoyed tonight's program, consider making a donation to help us continue to offer this and other great programs, or consider becoming a member. A History Center of Olmsted County membership offers a wide variety of benefits, including access to free and reduced cost events like this. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.